the most secret part of Red Bull's 2026 engine has just leaked. And it's already triggering panic inside Ferrari, Audi, and even Mercedes. According to multiple teams, Red Bull is exploiting a combustion loophole so dangerous, it could be worth up to 15 free horsepower without breaking a single rule, yet. But here's what no one expected: the engine is legal when cold, and illegal when hot. And if the FIA notices, a single technical directive could erase Red Bull's biggest 2026 advantage before the season even begins. Because this isn't just an innovation. It's a weapon, and the rest of the grid just found out they're already behind. Publicly, Red Bull has maintained a tone of quiet confidence around its 2026 engine project. The collaboration with Ford was presented as a statement of intent, a sign that the team was ready to control every aspect of its destiny, from aerodynamics to combustion. Interviews with key figures like Christian Horner and Rob Marshall described the progress as on target and technically impressive. But despite the steady stream of optimism, there's been a persistent silence around one specific aspect of the engine's development: how Red Bull plans to extract competitive performance under the tighter hybrid and energy limitations introduced for 2026. The new power unit regulations are designed to level the field. All teams face the same challenges: reduced fuel flow, an expanded reliance on electric energy, and tighter restrictions on combustion frequency and deployment zones. On paper, it's a reset. But in practice, it opens a new front in the innovation war: the art of manipulating performance without breaching the numbers. It's in this murky middle ground that Red Bull appears to have found something different. Something aggressive. And the fact that rivals are already reacting months before track testing suggests that Red Bull's innovation isn't just unique. It's unsettling. What triggered the current wave of internal panic? Was it a press release or a failed test? It was a series of leaks, technical snapshots, not final specifications shared during early FIA compliance meetings. These are documents teams were required to submit, outlining projected energy recovery, combustion mapping, and heat management systems. Most manufacturers complied without fuss. But Red Bull's data contained markers that didn't align with expected behavior. Multiple engineers noticed the same thing: a thermal curve that shouldn't exist under normal pressure and ignition conditions. The numbers didn't break the rules, but they didn't fit the mold either. And that's exactly why this is becoming a problem. Because when innovation doesn't look like innovation, when it looks like something hidden in plain sight, other teams start asking questions. According to internal sources, Ferrari and Mercedes both requested clarification from the FIA, not by accusing Red Bull of wrongdoing, but by asking whether certain pressure thresholds and energy deployment timings were within intended operational scope. In regulatory language, that's the first move in a much bigger game. It invites the FIA to either endorse what Red Bull is doing or begin preparing to outlaw it. But Red Bull has said nothing. No defense. No denial. No press management at all. That silence has been interpreted in two ways. Inside Red Bull, it may reflect confidence, a belief that what they built is not only legal, but untouchable. Among rivals, however, the silence feels like confirmation. Because if Red Bull had nothing to hide, why not get ahead of the narrative? Why not declassify the element at the heart of the concern? The lack of clarity has now become the story. And the more time passes without comment, the more Red Bull's silence looks less like strategy and more like containment. The FIA has remained equally quiet. No technical directive has been issued. No revision to the regulatory interpretation has been made. And this is where the pressure builds. Because the moment the FIA is asked to interpret something that hasn't happened yet, something theoretical, something based on projected engine behavior, they're in a bind. If they clarify too early, they could cripple innovation. If they wait too long, they risk allowing a team to gain a season's worth of development time on a concept that might ultimately be banned. And in that gap, Red Bull has time to move further ahead. What we're left with is a scenario that is technically stable, but politically explosive. Red Bull's 2026 engine isn't illegal. It's not under protest. And yet, it's the single most discussed power unit in every technical meeting, simulator room, and private engineering channel across the grid. Because in a sport where details define dominance, and perception can trigger regulation, Red Bull has now found itself at the center of a controversy that hasn't even been named. And if the FIA doesn't move soon, the only thing more dangerous than the engine Red Bull is building might be what they're building it around. The leak began quietly. Not through a journalist, not through an angry whistleblower, but through a sequence of data-sharing protocols between teams and the FIA. Each engine manufacturer, as part of the 2026 pre-compliance process, submitted digital schematics and system simulations outlining their proposed hybrid deployment strategies. It was during this early-stage information exchange that Red Bull's document landed in front of a rival engineer. And something didn't sit right. The combustion timeline embedded in the telemetry data showed thermal behavior that seemed to oscillate outside normal stabilization ranges, a technical anomaly that couldn't be explained by simple miscalculation. At first, it was assumed to be a modeling error. After all, preseason data is full of placeholders and exaggerated margins for stress testing. But the more closely rival engineers examined the figures, the clearer the anomaly became. Red Bull's energy recovery system wasn't just efficient, it was behaving suspiciously like a staged compression booster, something that would only activate during high-temperature cycles. The simulation showed an efficiency spike that shouldn't be possible under the FIA's energy cap unless Red Bull had found a way to temporarily alter combustion pressure zones without directly increasing fuel flow. That's when the second red flag appeared. In the file's annotations, footnotes meant only for internal review, there was a brief reference to thermal redistribution across staged ignition range. For most engineers, that phrase is meaningless. But to those with hybrid specialization, it suggests something very specific. Red Bull might be attempting to move energy load between ignition phases to bypass heat saturation, effectively stacking combustion cycles for a split-second performance gain. It's like compressing two punches into one, but so quickly that no one notices. Legal? Maybe. Detectable on a standard compliance check? Almost certainly not. Once this pattern was identified, panic spread fast. Ferrari's technical group reportedly sent an encrypted follow-up inquiry to the FIA, not accusing Red Bull, but requesting a redefinition of allowable pre-ignition fluctuation under load. Audi and Honda followed within days, using similar language. But the most telling move came from Mercedes. According to internal sources, they didn't just flag the issue, they began reconfiguring their own engine simulations to explore what Red Bull might be doing, not to replicate it, but to understand how to protect against it. Because if this system works, it's not just fast, it's disruptive. And no one wants to get caught unprepared in 2026. Internally, Red Bull has gone completely dark. Engineers have been ordered to restrict cross-departmental access to any documents labeled under the powertrain hybrid phase strategy. Ford's US division, which was initially looped into the broader development narrative, has reportedly been placed on a need-to-know update structure. This means even Ford doesn't have complete visibility into the final iteration of the engine, an unusual step, given that they're a primary partner. But it makes sense if Red Bull believes they're sitting on something explosive, something that needs to be fully protected until the last possible moment. Or until the FIA forces their hand. But here's where the tension sharpens. Red Bull hasn't denied the data. They haven't claimed it was outdated, inaccurate, or theoretical. By choosing not to comment, they've left the door wide open. And in Formula One, what you don't deny becomes the foundation for what everyone else builds their suspicions on. That silence is now being interpreted as strategic delay. Buy time. Keep developing. Force the FIA to be the first to speak, because once they do, the narrative shifts from curiosity to confrontation. And if you control when that confrontation begins, you also control how prepared you are to handle it. The leak itself wasn't publicized yet. But the consequences are already shaping the 2026 grid. Teams are shifting budgets, recalibrating expectations, and most importantly, pressing the FIA to act. Not through accusations, but through polite, procedural questions, the kind of questions that may sound technical on the surface, but underneath are designed to deliver only one thing: pressure. Because in Formula One, the line between innovation and illegality isn't measured by truth, it's measured by who moves first. Formula One doesn't punish creativity, it punishes visibility. As long as an idea remains buried in technical complexity, shielded by plausible deniability, it's allowed to live. That's the zone Red Bull is now occupying. The 2026 regulations were drafted to prevent major disparities in power units, but in doing so, the FIA introduced new blind spots, places where legality is less about rules and more about interpretation. This is the regulatory gray area Red Bull appears to be manipulating. And they've done it with a precision that suggests this wasn't an accident. It was planned. At the heart of the issue is a concept that, until recently, was seen as more academic than practical: pressure phase ignition harmonics. It's a mouthful, and it wasn't supposed to matter. But Red Bull's data suggests they're exploiting exactly that, layering pressure shifts across combustion events to squeeze additional torque from the engine without breaching thermal flow caps. The problem? That behavior exists in a space the FIA never fully defined. It's not explicitly banned. But it's not explicitly allowed either. It exists in the unwritten margins of the 2026 rulebook, and that's where Red Bull has taken position. To the FIA, this is a worst-case scenario. Because now they're facing a situation where one team might be following the letter of the law while completely ignoring its spirit. And that's where regulation becomes political. The FIA doesn't want to look like they're killing innovation. But they also can't allow a precedent where the first team to find a technical loophole defines the championship before the season begins. Red Bull isn't violating any rules yet. But they're building toward a moment where the FIA will have to either rewrite the rulebook or watch the rest of the grid fall behind before testing even starts. This isn't new territory for Red Bull. They've lived in gray zones before. Exhaust-blown diffusers, flexible floors, aeroelasticity in the DRS flap. Each time, they pushed the interpretation of legality until the FIA had no choice but to respond. What's different now is that they're doing it with an engine, a core, homologated component that can't be changed mid-season. If the FIA doesn't intervene before engine freeze, they'll be locking in a power unit that may be fundamentally out of balance with the rest of the grid. And that would trigger a political crisis unlike anything since Ferrari's secret engine settlement in 2019. What complicates this even further is the nature of Ford's involvement. They're not just a logo. They're a partner. And while Ford may not have been the architect of this combustion anomaly, they're now tied to it. If the FIA rules against the Red Bull design, Ford's return to F1 begins with a regulatory embarrassment. That raises the stakes dramatically. Because now, the issue isn't just about fairness. It's about corporate reputation, global partnerships, and how far Red Bull is willing to go to protect a competitive edge they believe is fully justified. Meanwhile, rival teams are being forced into an uncomfortable corner. They don't want to protest something that hasn't been proven illegal. They don't want to accuse Red Bull without concrete evidence. But they also don't want to wait until the first round of 2026 to find out that Red Bull's innovation gives them a 0.6 advantage down the straight. So they're applying pressure the only way they can, through clarification requests, quiet political nudges, and controlled media leaks. The goal isn't to trigger a scandal. The goal is to force the FIA to blink first and make the ambiguity disappear. But the truth is, Red Bull doesn't need this loophole to be legal forever. They just need it to remain undefined long enough to finalize their design, lock their engine, and enter 2026 with a configuration that's too complex, too expensive, and too late to ban. That's the game. And so far, they're playing it better than anyone else. The risk, of course, is that the FIA sees the trap and decides to spring it early.